going to hand you over to Dr. Gabriel Hemery. I'm really thrilled he's here today to talk to us.
I was asked to speak about my journey through trees, so I guess my career and my passion about trees. I'm going to speak for maybe 45 minutes, and it'd be nice to have some questions and conversation at the end if you're still with me. And so hopefully not too long. See if the clicker works. Oh, no. Yay! Great. So I thought I'd start with a Cumbrian image, just while I sort of introduce things. So this is up near the Old Man in Coniston, some beautiful ash trees before ash dieback struck. What I should say is that I know nothing about boats. I know a little bit about wood, but it's trees, it's my passion. And as Colin said, I've spent my life as a forest scientist actually studying trees for timber improvement. So I am actually maybe one of the world's few PhDs in walnut for timber production. So you can call me Dr. Nuts if you like. So that's my passion. I went travelling across Kyrgyzstan in Central Asia, collecting seeds, hoping that we could bring in a new generation of walnuts that would produce high quality timber. It didn't work very well, sadly. I had a fabulous time in Kyrgyzstan, but the trees really struggled to grow in Britain. So walnuts remain a bit of an enigma for those who are trying to grow good quality walnuts. It's quite difficult, but I could speak for hours about walnuts and you definitely get bored. Colin asked me, in fact, maybe more strongly suggested that I should not use any graphs, so this is my graph. If you imagine the whole land area of Britain in a percentage, so there's 100 images here. If you were in Finland, the percentage land cover is over 70% of Finland is covered in trees, which I'm sure is no surprise. They have a lot of woodlands. That's what we've got in Britain, 13%. We are the second least wooded country in Europe. And if you look behind you, if you haven't got a stiff neck, there's some amazing woodlands just the other side of the lake. We're surrounded by beautiful woodlands here. How comes we've got so few? And why is that? Well, it's an historical thing. Of course, we're somewhat of a crowded island. We've felled and thinned lots of our trees. But our trees are the cradle of civilization itself. We emerged from the forest as human beings, as Homo sapiens. And the forest gave us our tools, they gave us our materials for heat. They're behind the Industrial Revolution. I'm sure I don't need to tell you how important they are for construction and for the history of boat building. The fact that a lot of our laws arose from timber and how it was grown near to rivers. So for the fact you couldn't fell a tree on the Forest of Dean in a certain navigable area because all the quality oak had to go to shipbuilding. So in lots of ways, trees have been very important to our society. So at 13% cover, you think, well, that's pretty bad. What are we doing about it? Well, there are lots of big ideas to try and plant more trees, to try and persuade landowners to do that. But it's a really tricky thing. And you imagine being a farmer and you're being told that you're used to a 1 year rotation of a crop, or you've got cows or sheep, other livestock, to be convinced to invest 50 years. And that would be a walnut, funny enough, probably our quickest growing broadleaf tree. How about an ash? Do you know how long an ash is before it gets to maturity? Anyone hazard a guess? 25? 90. At 70, roughly. What about an oak? 100, it's pretty good. Yeah, about 120 or 150. So that's a sort of, in broadleaf terms, if you're growing hardwood timber, that's the investment you need to make. It's at least 50 years. That'd be wild cherry, walnut, 70 years for ash, 120 for oak. How about Sitka spruce? You can see lots of spruce on the horizon out there, very distinctive silhouette. Norway or Sitka spruce. Any ideas about the rotation age? Well, lots of big range then. 20 to 50, I think I heard. 45, roughly. So most of our productive conifers are pretty rapid compared to broadleaves, and that's why you see a lot of conifers planted as commercial trees, But of course they produce softwood, which is not the same as hardwood. And as boat builders, you will know that. So the reason this slide's still here is because I've got some bad news. So we've got 30% woodland cover in Britain, which is the second least wooded country, equal to the Netherlands in Europe. It's pretty embarrassing. However, only half of our woodlands are managed. Just think about that a moment. So we got down to from 13%, lowest, one of the lowest in Europe, and now half our woodlands. Well, what do I mean by that, half managed? Well, it's not a brilliant statistic because we don't actually know the details, but we think about half of them managed because they have a management plan. The owner has looked at the woodland and said, I think I can grow good timber out of this, or I've got a responsibility to care for the environment, or improve the landscape, clean the air or water, all the different reasons you might have woodlands. But only half of them have produced a plan. The other half don't really know what they're doing. They just have woods and say, aren't they nice? And it's a bit of a technical thing because you could have a whole area of woodland where the best thing you can do for wildlife is to leave it alone. But you make a conscious decision to leave that woodland alone. And there's a management plan. Even if you don't manage it, you have a management plan. So that's what I'm saying is we have a tiny proportion, and of that tiny proportion, only half of that is being managed. So there's no wonder that we're the third largest importer of timber in the world. Until last year we were the second largest, but nonetheless it's pretty frightening really. So we're behind China and Russia. And you think about the size of our country, to be the third largest importer of timber in the world, that's pretty shocking. And you look out the window and see those beautiful trees and say, well surely, what's happening to those? Well, there's this whole sort of cultural dimension that comes in then. And as a forester, I'm proud of it, people say, well, why are you chopping those trees down? You hear it all the time. I was with the National Trust yesterday up in the north of the county, who have 3,000 hectares in Cumbria, the largest woodland landowner. And the most common question for them all the time, people stop them and say, why are you felling trees? Why can I hear chainsaws? And they're the same people who go home for their wonderful holiday in the lakes and probably have wooden doors and windows and floors and tables and chairs, and they never question about where that timber came from. But it probably came from Finland. Not that that's a bad thing. And not long ago it would have come from tropical forests, which is definitely a bad thing. So this whole idea that can we grow more timber in Britain? Yes, we can. Can we ever become self-reliant in timber? No, we can't. But we could try. We could try a lot harder and be a lot better at it. So that's the origin really of where I come from personally and in my role at the Soil Foundation, which I'll talk about briefly. You might get a little flavour here of some hints about why I've chosen these slides. So this is a Mediterranean oak. I don't know if you know, but we're matched in this country to be similar to the Mediterranean in our climate by 2050. And that's really close. So it's all very well if you've got an annual crop of barley or rape or something, you can just change your crop. But if you go back to what I told you about those cycles and you're investing at least 50 years, the trees you plant today are going to be growing in Mediterranean conditions. Just think about that for a moment. But what if they don't? What if the climatologists have it wrong? What if we don't quite go the way they think? Well, I'm not to question the climatologists. Remember, I'm Dr. Nuts, I'm not Dr. something else. But we have to think about that. What are the trees that are going to survive? How are we going to retain woodlands which are good for wildlife and good for us who love using timber? And that's quite a big thing, as you can imagine. We're surrounded by most amazing native forests. So these are the Caledonian pine woods up in Scotland, with the granny pines, so-called old, ancient, naturally grown Scots pine, so you think. Do you know why those beautiful granny pines with the big boughs, the classic things where the capercaillies nest in the branches, do you know why they look like that? It's not just because they're old. Well, it's your fault as shipbuilders, because in the 19th century, up to the 19th century, you felled all the good trees for masts, for ships, and you left behind all the rubbish. Seriously, you did. That's what the shipbuilding industry did. It left behind all the rubbish trees because they were the short, leaning ones with big, heavy branches. And they're the trees we love today. They're the trees that bring all the tourists in. They are the trees where the capercaillie roosts. But the perfectly great, tall, straight pines that actually grow naturally in Scotland were mostly felled. Just interesting perspective, perhaps. Frenchman's Creek, very close, and very close. Frenchman's Creek. I wasn't up a tall mast. I had a drone. I cheated. I don't know if you did you get the sequence? There was a boat in every image. Good. I've run out of boat images. Sorry. That's it now. So a little bit about Silver. Colin's very nice to introduce the fact that I co-founded Silver in 2009. It's really to address some of the stuff I was talking about. The fact that we've got very few trees. We're not managing the trees we do have very well. We're importing huge amounts of timber. Surely we can grow and do things better, and that's what Silver's about. And I'm sure you're aware there's lots of organisations out there that own woodlands, that do things with trees and woods, we thought very carefully about why we'd start a new charity. Well, it's because we thought we could do something slightly different. We could invest in innovation. And one of the sort of major models that a lot of these environmental charities have is they have money, they buy woods, and they manage the woods to their objectives. And I don't need to say who they are, but you know the big environmental charities that own trees and land. I mentioned one already. That's great, and that's their model, but they have a relatively small proportion. So the National Trust has 26,000 hectares. I mean, that's a drop in the ocean when you look at the woodland cover we have in Britain. So if we're going to do anything to try and change the way that people manage their woods, not just for timber, but for wildlife and landscape and other reasons, we need to work with a private landowner. So 70%, so 2/3 roughly, of all woodlands in Britain are owned by private individuals, not by the Forest Commission, not by the National Trust and the Woodland Trust and others. So it's a kind of cultural dimension to our work. So we thought, well, how can we work with those who own the woods to get them to do things better? And this is one example, working with a woodland owner, a landowner actually, not a woodland owner, a landowner in Derbyshire. And we got some funding from government, and we developed a scheme where we can offer them help and support to go and plant more trees, which is fantastic. And what we really invested in, and you won't be able to see this at the back, but we've invented I don't know if you know anything about geographical information systems, GIS, but we devised our own website basically that helps woodland owners map their woodlands, come up with a management plan, and then do everything around that woodland. And because of that, we've now got about 200,000 hectares, which is, what does that represent? About 9% of all UK woodlands. In our system, we don't own any of those trees. But you can see why our sort of slightly fleet of foot and different way of working, we have 3 times as much as the Woodland Trust and National Trust in our reach. I'm not going to say control, because it's definitely not control. So it's a very different model, and that's how we work. So you won't see us out there producing papers and lobbying or things like that. We kind of work behind the scenes. I guess we're in the engine room, if you like, using something that might work with you guys. We're down below, shoveling coal in the old-fashioned way, trying to do the right thing. We're not really out there shouting out about stuff. And just a few of our projects. We've got a forest lab project, so we engage woodland owners in collecting data around pests and diseases, trying to monitor climate change effects in their woodlands. It's called Forest Lab. I don't know if you better see any of those, will you? Very well. This is a project where we're helping people assess the conditions of their woodlands for wildlife. We've got a project helping people identify what wildlife could be in their areas so they can manage their woodlands better, called the Woodland Wildlife Toolkit. And for that one, we work with RSPB, Woodland Trust, Natural England, loads of charities. And a project called Nature Bid, where we help people trade carbon and other things. And we've had £26 million go through our platform. It's like a reverse eBay, so the cheapest bidder wins. So we do all sorts of quirky stuff. Most people haven't heard about us, but they might use our systems to say, oh, you're the guys that did that. Yes, we're them. And we're based in the Wood Centre, as Colin said, in Oxfordshire. We're active in England and Wales and registered separately in Scotland as a charity. And this is our site. We've got a young woodland. So we had this idea of never owning any trees because we had this big idea of working with those who do. And then the amazing co-founder, Sir Martin Wood, who set up Oxford Instruments in the 60s. It was the first ever spin-out company from a university. It was a kind of a new idea in the 60s. And they developed him and his wife, Audrey, set up a business that basically developed the technology behind MRI scanners and superconductivity magnets and all that stuff. And thank goodness he went into engineering and not into forestry, because forestry was his other passion, but he definitely wouldn't have made much money in forestry. So he's invested in several charities, and silver being one of them. And he died a couple of years ago. And about 6 years after getting silver going, and we were looking like things were establishing well, he just said, I had this old farm, Gabriel, if you come up with a good idea, you can have it. I mean, an amazing, true philanthropist. And I'll give you a bit of money, £1 million, to get on and do it. So we took this, renovated his old, completely redundant farm complex. It was actually where they trialled the first John Deere combine harvesters that came across from the States in 1942, I found out later. They were trialled on the land surrounding. And we got the old buildings and vehicle pits and stuff on the site still from that era. But I'll often get my pointer working. Our offices are here. Colin's workshop is there. This is our wood school. This was an accident. So when we planted our new woodland, here it's 4 hectares. I don't know what a hectare is. Imagine doing a 100-metre sprint in one direction and then doing it in 3 times more in a square. So 100, 100, 100, that's a hectare, 2.47 acres. It's 4 of them. So it's quite small. But it's a great gift to have, because at least we've been able to practice what we preach. So we've got sort of climate-ready, futuristic species and so on in here. And we've got a community orchard supported by a local community. And that is the wood centre. And when you do due diligence and you plant a new woodland, you have to think about what impacts that woodland might have, which is great. You might be ruining some ancient archaeology, and this is where we've learned massively as foresters from 100 years ago. So in 1919, when the Forestry Commission was set up, after the end of the First World War, we were running out of timber strategically, and people say, what are we going to do about this? What if there's another world war? And surely there wasn't there. We needed that timber. So they set about planting huge areas of conifers because they're the most productive, fast-growing species, as I explained. And that's what the Forest Commission did. And such was our bent at the time, of course. It was nascent, the ideas of environmentalism. They planted everywhere in straight rows. They created acidification of our watercourses. They planted right through the middle of ancient long barrows and tumuli and things like that. And of course, it's terrible now. In retrospect, we understand that wasn't a good thing. So modern forestry, we have to think about all these things, which is very important when we plant new woodland. So we discovered an interesting looking field, a crop mark. For the 1976 drought in this field, you can see a strange rectangle. So to cut a long story short, we did a dig with Oxford Archaeology, discovered what turned out to be a very early Anglo-Saxon house. Didn't know what it looked like, but it was a house of some size. So me and Big Gob said, wouldn't it be great if we rebuilt this? And that's what we went out and did. Got some money from Heritage Lottery and rebuilt it. And 88 trees. So you imagine 88 trees all chopped down by hand because they didn't have chainsaws in the Anglo-Saxon era, of course. They didn't even have saws. Everything was done with axe and wedge. So we had a great fun building this. And it's a slight accident, as I say, in the middle of our woods, but it's quite entertaining. Inside one of the buildings, the potato store, we've now got this community of woodworkers. So some are commercially well-established businesses that come and join us. Others are very new, nascent businesses. It's a bit like a specialist industrial park, but only for woodworkers. Sadly, you probably can't see, but this series of portraits I did recently for all the different business people, they're all male. We did have one. We've now got none, which is pretty shocking. I'll say more about that in a moment. Behind this guy's head is my colleague Joe's, one of the most famous people in this portrait here. You can't see who it is. It's this gentleman on the left. So it's been wonderful having Colin join us because, as I said, a lot of the people with us are very young and are starting up their business. Colin's come in having downsized. He's come from the other end. And I hope I don't make him blush too much, or maybe I should. But now I've got the opportunity. He's greatly respected, and it's wonderful to have someone with his experience just being around. And it's all about, it's not only the sort of hard collaboration, because the businesses are beginning to work together on contracts and projects, but also the soft stuff. the chat over a coffee and over lunch and things. So we're really keen to create that community of all sorts of people. So it's great to have Colin at the heart of that. But also someone else. This was a kind of an accident, but a wonderful one. We needed a new bookkeeper, and we discovered that Lucy had some great talents in that area. So I think over a year ago, wasn't it, Lucy, now? Lucy's joined us as our financial manager, and we haven't looked back. So we're fully embedded in the Hemery family. Sylvester, what do you want to do first? I think Forester, maybe? Definitely a Forester. And we do lots with young people. So we've got a wood school. So we teach a 6-month professional course in woodwork, take on a whole raft of different people, mostly college leavers, who I'm sure you all know the sort of 10,000 hour rule, where that's what you need as a minimum to become competent using hand tools and making. So these guys come out of college, perhaps sold a myth that they're going to be well skilled enough to run a business. It's nothing like close. And that's just doing the craft. What about your VAT and your tax returns and everything else? So we try and help people by giving them lots of skills in different ways. So there's the 6-month course. People come part-time, tutored, and then they can spend another time in the workshop with us. And we work on real-life projects. They're standing in front of a group of stools designed for the National Trust as a customer. So they come and make real-life projects for us. We're really careful to avoid slave labour. I say that's a joke, but we understand the concept that actually what we're doing is getting to make real products, and we're being paid to make them. So because of that, we can charge them a lot less in their fee. So they pay at least half of what they'd pay anywhere else to learn with us. But they work on a series of different commissions. And through that, they learn about the quality control, timings, the discipline of making, repeat making. So we've had a great alumni. They nearly all get jobs. We've had 3 courses now. And then we do other stuff. We've got a summer school. This is a week-long experiential. It's a bit like Bake Off, where we get a whole raft of people. We've had a very strong interest in gender and trying to make an impact in the sector. So a lot of young women and other non-binary come and join us, and this is what they created after a week-long sort of workshop, looking at some sort of prototype furniture. And this is a really interesting example. This is a story of a non-binary person designing a ladder and just make 2 of the rungs a bit different. And it's a very powerful story if you think about this. You look at that and think, well, that's a bit of a rubbish ladder. There's something wrong with it. It's different. And that's the whole story here. Just because it's still a ladder, but because it's got something different about it, you have an instant prejudice against it. You can see the point that's being made. So Rachel here designed this really interesting ladder, and this is part of a series that went to the V&A Museum. So we, unprecedented collaboration with the V&A, this week-long workshop 2 years ago ended up in an exhibition at the V&A. So that's kind of partly what we do, and I said I'd talk about the gender project. So we launched last year. We had a seminar for about 70. These are women and non-binary people who work in industry. They're either business leaders or they're young people starting up in business, in furniture and other craft. And we had the event to try and reveal what were the issues. And we did a bit of science behind it too, a bit of research. And it's really interesting, but also pretty shocking that what we learned was it's about 50-50 in university for those who learn making in university. When it comes to industry, the gender bias is 95-5. So something significant happens, in that first year of coming out of college and trying to find a job. And that's what we're really trying to do something about. So we're delighted that we've just had some new funding to appoint a coordinator and do a whole load of research and outreach to universities and schools and try and do something about it. And I know we succeeded when our 25 businesses in the Wood Centre are no longer all male, which really makes me feel very frustrated. So I hope we can do something about that. I'm just going to waffle on about books for a little while. So this was my first book. I actually put this up to embarrass myself. For one, I look very young and I don't have a beard and I don't wear suits anymore either. But this is the launch of my first book, The New Silver. And I'm sure you've all heard of the Royal Society. This is a society set up in the 17th century with all the luminaries of the time. So Sir Isaac Newton, Christopher Wren, Sir Robert Boyle, a whole list of amazing people who created the Royal Society. And I bet if I asked you what their first ever publication was, you might hazard a guess that it might be something to do with astrophysics, chemistry, mathematics. No. The very first publication out of the Royal Society was forestry. Yeah. Yay. And that's how important timber was in the 17th century. Without timber, we had no navy, and therefore we had no sea power, we had no trading. So oak, particularly oak, was the preeminent material for society, for our culture, for our business, for our global superpower. And hence, when we realised we were running out of timber for shipbuilding, the Royal Society was looked at as being the body that might sort of have some view about it. So they commissioned this polymath, John Evelyn, who had written books about smog in London and coinage and all sorts of different things to write, to investigate about the state of forestry in Britain. Is it sounding familiar now? 350 years ago, same story. And he wrote this book called Silver, or Propagation of Timber in His Majesty's Dominions. And it set out all the things about the different species, how they should be grown, what landowners could do better. And it's a marvellous book. And here is the president of the Royal Forest Society holding their copy of Silver from 1664. And there's me in my wonderful youth in 2014, which is exactly 350 years later, with my version called The New Silver, which I co-wrote with an amazing artist, Sarah Simblett. And that's Sarah there, and there's my co-founder Martin, and me even younger looking for some reason, just going back in time. And this is the book when it first came out. So this kind of got me into book writing, and the idea for me was trying to translate this passion for trees and to manage trees better for perhaps the common reader to understand a bit more about forestry, to maybe welcome the sound of a chainsaw in the wood and not think it's a bad thing. So New Silver came out then. It was a very successful book. It sold out several times, reprinted. It's no longer red, but it's blue. There's a few copies over there with a blue spine, slightly shrunk. But the most amazing artwork. I would put some up, but it just doesn't do it justice. You need to see it, so do have a look. So this was commissioned with 200 original drawings. And although I'm a passionate photographer, there's something about drawings that draw the eye in, and a good artist can tell you what you should be seeing without you knowing it. They'll help you understand something. And Sarah's the most amazing artist. She worked on Botany for the Artist, did human anatomy as well. And I don't know if you know anything about publishing, but the idea of writing a book with 200 original drawings is not a commercial project at all. So I managed to persuade Bloomsbury that we could take on Sarah at Silver as our artist in residence, and in return they'd allow us to sell the book directly to recoup our investment in Sarah. So all the books sold go directly, all the money goes not to me, but to Silver Foundation. So just a small thing to mention. And there's Sarah working. This is in Caledonian Pinewood in the snow. I was better prepared than she was, so she's wearing, I think, 3 of my coats. I wasn't completely naked, but I had to keep moving to stay warm, put that way. But it was the most amazing privilege to have an artist like that as almost like my camera, to go to a site and say, I'd like this to be depicted, and we discuss how it might look. And as I said, the drawings are just amazing. So you start in the field in pencil and then finish back in the studio. So do take a look. And this is kind of the end of the story. I'm still looking young, aren't I? Working with Bloomsbury Publishing, so Bloomsbury were the artists, and as in the Harry Potter publisher. And it's true, you go in the Bloomsbury Publishing, the carpet's about up to your knees in thickness. It's that luxurious. So they definitely did well with Harry Potter. But the team were amazing at Bloomsbury. They really were passionate about the book, the quality of the book itself, the font, and everything around it was done with great style. So the book itself is a beautiful thing. You don't need to write your words. I'm not saying my words are beautiful, but the book is beautiful. And that's it, and that's the blue version there. So that sort of got me into writing, and it's become, I guess, a just a passion. You know, I'm full-time employed by Silver. I just like doing something else with my time. My kids are grown up, so I write in my own time. And I've dabbled in a bit of sort of half fiction. This was a story of Victorian plant hunter John Jeffrey. I don't know if you may have heard of David Douglas. He was perhaps a preeminent plant hunter. He went off to California in the early 19th century. And like most plant hunters, he died a terrible death. Most plant hunters die a terrible death. I have been a plant hunter, but only for a short while, so I don't know whether that means something's coming. David Douglas went on to collect a huge number of new trees. Lots of our productive conifers are thanks to him. So Douglas fir is obviously, that's why it's called Douglas fir, collected by David Douglas. And he actually died a terrible death in Hawaii. He fell down an animal pit dug to trap wild bulls. And then he wasn't discovered until, I think, the actual wild bull they're trying to catch fell in the pit with him and gored him to death. I mean, that's a pleasant way. There's some of the other stories I could tell you. The other plant hunters. That's a good way to go. So I wrote about John Jeffrey, who in 1849, he was only 23 years old, working at Royal Botanic Garden in Edinburgh as a gardener, was plucked out of obscurity and said, hey, we want someone a generation later to follow in David Douglas's. Could you just go to North America and find some new trees? It's almost as detailed a brief as he had. So he had to sail across with the Hudson Bay Company to the East Coast. Then he had to follow with the trading company, with the fur trappers and others, walked 2,000 miles over the top of what's now Canada, over the Rockies. Got to where David Douglas was very active in around Hurdy-Gurdy Island, and then headed down the west coast through California. And he discovered Jeffrey pine, which is one of our 5-needle pines. You know, Scots pine has 2 needles in a little pair, like that. Some pines have different numbers, and there's a 5-needle pine, that's Jeffrey pine. They have enormous, well, not that big, enormous cones. That's the Jeffrey pine. But 3 years later, he disappeared without a trace. And what's mysterious about him, they kept asking, please send some samples back. Please tell us where you got to. And he was really bad at communicating. But nonetheless, some boxes with things, well, seed, did get back to Edinburgh. But he was a very bad communicator. And he just sort of fell off the end of the world. He seemed to disappear. And the rumours were he was killed by Indians in New Mexico. So I found all the old letters in Edinburgh. And I kind of took them and then added the fiction bit. So I knew exactly where he was each day and what he collected, and sort of invented a life around that. So that's what that book's about, green gold. Because trees were as valuable as gold at the time. You brought seed back. To the Victorians, having the latest giant redwood or something like that was such a prestige thing to have. And that's why any of the big estates around here you might have gone to see, very often you'll see a pair of giant redwoods, or Wellingtonians you might call them, named after the Duke of Wellington, near their entrance, because there was such high cachet. It's like the latest, you know, however big they are now, 60-inch plasma screens. You know, that's the equivalent, having a Wellingtonia in your garden. So that's why it's called green gold. And currently I'm working on this 3-book series exploring the forests of Britain. So my passion has been really, I wanted to write about forestry, and that's the new silver. I wanted to write something about where to find trees. So where could you go and see a beautiful wood or see some wildlife? And so I pitched this idea to Bloomsbury, and they were quite keen. And it turned into we decided a 3-book series, starting with Scotland, and then Wales, and now England. And so I'm still working on the series. In total, there'll be 1,000 woods across Britain. I've got a book patron scheme, so people who sort of want to invest in my craziness can have their name in the front of the book. That came out in last year, so that's got 365 sites across Scotland. You can see the loch. This is a drone shot again. I don't do many drone, but sometimes you just get a very different perspective, which is lovely. The bird's eye view really helps. This is Sylvan. It's a very distinctive mountain, an old. It is the core of a volcano, with all the sort of the soil was washed away, and you're left with a volcanic plug. Very distinctive mountain. But some of the most amazing, beautiful oak woodland. These are our Celtic or Atlantic rainforests. So there's precious as tropical rainforests, but we have some in Britain, and many people I think aren't aware. So down the western coast, Some parts of the southwest into Wales, Cumbria, and then up into Scotland are the Atlantic rainforests. So very precious for bryophytes, which are the liverworts, mosses, and lichens, and then also fern life as well. So the sort of lower plants, as they're sometimes called, very rich in that, and very distinctive bird life like pied flycatchers and nuthatch and treecreeper and so on. Just to make some beautiful sights. Water's always photographically a great image. It sort of draws the eye through the image. And of course, iconic wildlife. In Cumbria, we've got red squirrels still. I don't know if you know about the whole story of red squirrel being one of our native mammals. Its most threatened status now because of the grey. So the grey was introduced from North America. Not only is it more dominant, it will outcompete the red, but it also carries a pox, the squirrel pox, which it's resistant to, and the reds are not. So this is the story that they've been pushed up and up through Britain. There's a few enclaves like in the Isle of Wight. There's no grey squirrels, so reds are doing well down there. But they are disappearing all the time. So the woods I've been around the last couple of days, I've heard of red. I haven't seen any. I've seen greys. So they're already mixing, and they're just going to carry on pushing through. There's lots of effort to try and find a contraceptive that is only effective for greys. So there's some good news on the horizon that perhaps we can do something about it. This is a very rare tree. This is the Arran whitebeam. So it's only present on the Isle of Arran and shows an anther scale. But there's all sorts of weird and wonderful trees you come across. I don't know if you know how many native trees we've got in Britain, and the idea of nativeness is a big thing that's being pushed by some charities. But we've only got about 40 or 45 species in Britain that are native. Go to France, there's about 200. In America, it's 2,000. So we've got a very small sort of choice and small palette of trees to plant. I probably shouldn't get off on one on nativeness because I'll be here forever. But I'm concerned about this focus on native only. I can understand native trees are best for wildlife. They've grown up together. So our wildlife is fully and well adapted to native trees. But you remember I told you that we're going to be like the Mediterranean in 2050. So we have to be brave and bold, and we'd rather have forest than no forest. And it might be the forest we have doesn't have the same trees in, because the trees may not adapt. We don't know, but they may not. And it's the idea that you put all your eggs in one basket. So native is best, we're only planting native, and there are some very big, powerful organisations that's the message. I think that's a dangerous proposition. So I think we should be planting native and loving that, but we should also be loving the exotic and just embracing that and the opportunity that brings. And they might produce better timber, they might produce alternative home for wildlife. I'll give you a very specific example. In Wales, some of the largest forests like Towie, it's about, 6,000 hectares I think, mostly Corsican pine. Corsican pine looks like Scots pine, it just doesn't have a nice red bark. Is a twin needle pine. And it's thanks to that forest of Corsican pine that red squirrels are still present in Wales, because they produce an amazing seed for the diet of red squirrels. So there's sometimes unintended consequences. I suppose the danger is there could be negative unintended consequences, of course, and you can see that with some of the invasive species like rhododendron that's everywhere in Cumbria, or Himalayan balsam. We have a responsibility as human beings, but I'm just reflecting the other side of the coin. There can be benefits from being creative, if you like, and thinking about, not being just having such a narrow focus, think about native trees. Some of the, again, beautiful Caledonian pinewood up in Scotland, the loch. Wish I had a boat, you're probably thinking the same, to be around that loch. And aspen in that sort of time of year in the autumn, it's beautiful. It's the only poplar we have in our native stable in Britain, the aspen. And I don't know if you ever looked at aspen, but it has a flat petiole. Petiole is the leaf stalk, completely flat, and that's why they flutter in the wind. They're designed to flutter, and they make a lovely noise. You walk around a woodland, you can hear an aspen before you see it. Anyway, they're beautiful in the autumn. I finished working with Forest Guide Wales. That's coming out February. That's going to have 325 sites. I have to say it was wet a lot of the time I was doing my field work. As I explained, because I work full time, I can't pick and choose. I can't easily get to the places. It's like while I'm up in Cumbria, I'm doing research for the England book. I just have to take it as it is. And it's kind of interesting as a photographer. I can't wait for the perfect day or the perfect conditions. Relatively late to life, I've discovered a thing. It's the most amazing thing. It's called an umbrella. And seriously, it took me maybe a year of struggling in the rain to think, I could use an umbrella. Because I might have a great coat, thank you, yes. A great coat and hat, and I'm staying dry. But the challenge as a photographer, as soon as you get your camera out, whatever you're trying with your hand and try and keep the rain off the lens, that's the end of the shot. So it's been a great revolution to me to carry a small umbrella. It's transfer. I can't tell you how excited it makes me. Every time I get it out, my little pop-up one, it makes me so happy. And you can go to places like this in the rain. It rained a lot. This is the Waterfall Walk in the south of the country. It's beautiful. I met some inspiring people. This is Stump Up for Trees. They work with farmers and convince them that planting trees doesn't mean they'll lose money, but they'll earn money. It's good for their livestock, it's good for their tourism and other money-earning opportunities. And this is Rob Penn, who's an author. You might come across him. He did a great series in the woods. He owns a woodland in Wales. And he also went round with Freddie Flintoff in a van doing something weird. Anyway, he's a great communicator, Rob Penn on the left, and a local farmer, and they co-founded this organisation called Stump Up for Trees. And this is them in their young woodland in the mist. This hill has got the most amazing view, and that's all I could see. Was lucky to see the tree in the distance. But, a nice shot, I think. And I went to some amazing places, lots of beautiful wildlife. That's a heron, this is a nuthatch. If you're ever in the woods and you hear what sounds like a car alarm going off, but you're not near the car park, it's probably a nuthatch. Very distinctive sound. And they're beautiful little birds, like miniature woodpeckers. Castles everywhere. Of course, I had to get castles in Wales. I thought it's been clever here because the castle's blurred, but I got the stone chat perched on an alder in the front. And I had to put a boat in because I thought you might be waning by now. Are you okay? This is the hang-off in the canal and the church tunnel, one of the longest tunnels next to the very famous Ponticaitis aqueduct. And it's a great thing to walk through that. Again, a drone shot. This is up in Anglesey, showing quite a hard-to-reach woodland. Sometimes when you're in the woods, you can't see the wood for the trees, so the idea you can come out and get a view is quite handy. And this is down the Wye. This is called Near Harkening Rock, and the word near is in the name. It's kind of a weird name, Near Harkening Rock. And the Wye Valley is very heavily wooded, beautiful area in the autumn. And the Skirrid, very prominent landslip that happened long ago, creates this shape. And a tarn from when it was glaciated or near glaciated in this area of Wales. So, yeah, a beautiful place, country to explore. And I'm now working on Forest Guide England. This is down in Savernake, some beautiful oaks, managed for shipbuilding. Of course, this is what shipbuilders love, the big joints, the big branches like this that create useful timber. And this is how our oaks used to be managed. And you occasionally get a surprise. I was actually looking for a butterfly and then something caught my eye in the bramble. It's the grass snake on a site that's famous for butterflies. I had no good images of any butterflies, but I was very, very happy to find a grass snake in the thickets. And the dog was great at pointing at that one. I went to Knepp. This is where Lucy and Colin went there recently. Saw the stalks. This is a really inspiring private landowners. You've probably heard something about Knepp before, but they're reintroducing some of our lost wildlife. So these are stalks they've got an artificial platform at the top of the oak. I don't know if you can see, that's about to take off that male, I think, and that's a wood pigeon. You just get the sense of scale. I mean, they are really big birds. So it's super exciting to see new, iconic wildlife being reintroduced successfully into woodlands. Elsewhere on the estate, they've got pigs and longhorn cattle as well, so it's all part of a productive farming system. Elsewhere in the southeast, there's another site called the Blean, where they're introducing bison, and that's pretty exciting. So if you want to see big mammals in the woods, things are coming. And beavers are also present, also in Cumbria as well as Scotland. So there's some really exciting rewilding projects underway. But it's not all about those sort of woods. This is in the centre of London, and we know that trees are really important for health and well-being. So getting trees close to people, not necessarily people to come out to places like this. Not everyone's this lucky to be able to travel. But these sort of places around our cities, they cool our and clean our air and make the living environment that much better for people. And most extraordinary trees, like this is Burnham Beeches, these fabulous old ash and beech trees. So I'm having fun. I haven't really got any pictures of Cumbria because it would be too difficult to get them off my camera while I'm up here. This is the Holloways in Dorset, which are an amazing place. So I love these unusual places that people may have heard of but don't know how to get to, and that's what the book's all around. This reminded me of Sleepy Hollow. And if you've seen, especially the film, where the headless horseman gallops into the tree. So if you squint your eyes, you can see the horse and a lance in the tree, and quite like that. It does a bit, doesn't it? Yeah. And then finally, I think I'm probably running out of time soon. I started work on the tree almanac. So this is like an almanac's an old idea. The idea that you have every month of the year calendarized. So someone approached me, Robertson Books approached me to work on this. And I've just done a new one. It's coming out. You may not have seen this, people who know about it's not been launched yet, but this is the next version coming out for 2025, coming out in August. And I don't know if you've ever read this, but I thought I might just read you a poem. So this is in the next almanac. It's called The Best Time. The best time to plant a tree was when I was first me, and for that I love Ma, Pa and Auntie B. The best time to plant a tree was when I began to see, smell, touch and wonder about the little world and me. The best time to plant a tree was when the teenage me thought they knew better, lured by glam, glitter and TV. The best time to plant a tree was when she first loved me and two lives became one, daring to dream we may become three. The best time to plant a tree was when you came to be my precious one and only, a future to fight for, I foresee. The best time to plant a tree will be when I'm no longer me, safe below in a wooden shroud, remembered by a grove, you see. And this is part of this thing I'm just launching a book called A Tree Credit Score. It's got some clever maths in it, but actually it's very simple. My thesis is that we should all plant one tree for every year we live. And if you're of a certain age, you might be thinking, I wonder how I've got on with that. Actually, I would say it's never too late, and it's much quicker to plant a tree than you might imagine. And there's all sorts of ways you can do it. You can go and join a scheme or local wildlife trust, spend a day planting, and you can definitely in one day catch up. So I think, wouldn't it be a great civilization or society if everyone planted one tree for every year they lived on the earth? And if you start young, it's dead easy, right? Do one every year and you don't have to, end up in debt. So I've done this little credit score in the book. You better work it out. So finally, I want to thank my co-author and support dog. Unfortunately, she's not allowed in. I would have introduced her at this point. She's in the car, looking morose. This is Alba, who pretty much joins me on all my trips. She's an Italian Spinoni. But in all seriousness, as you might imagine, I've got an amazing family behind me, so especially my wife Jane, who kind of keeps things going while I'm gallivanting around in the forest. So I'm going to leave you with this thought: rise up, sow your future, grow some, tree law rules. Thank you very much. I don't know if